Commander Cax stood behind a thick glass wall, his 4 glowing eyes wide with excitement. He was a scientist from a galaxy far away, and he had just finished his greatest invention, the Nightmare Chamber. This room wasn't built to hurt the body, it was built to break the mind. Cax had tested it on creatures from 100 different planets. Strong warriors had cried within seconds. Wise philosophers had lost their minds in minutes. Now, it was the human's turn. Inside the dark, square room sat a man named Sam. He looked very small and very weak. He was wearing a simple T-shirt and jeans, sitting on a hard metal chair in the center of the room. He wasn't even tied down. He didn't need to be. The fear usually kept people from moving. Cax smiled, showing his sharp blue teeth. "Watch this," he whispered to his assistants. He pressed a large, glowing red button on the control panel. Suddenly, the lights in the chamber turned into a sickly, pale green. A sound started, a high-pitched, scratching scream that felt like needles poking into the brain. It was the sound of 1,000 dying machines. Then, the walls began to change. A thick, oily black liquid started dripping from the ceiling. It looked like blood, but darker. It smelled like rotten eggs and old trash. To make things worse, Cax turned the temperature down. Within seconds, the air turned freezing. Small bits of ice began to form on the metal chair. In any other species, this combination of horrible noise, disgusting smells, and biting cold would cause a total mental breakdown. Cax leaned in, waiting for the screaming to start. "In 10 minutes, he will beg for mercy," the commander whispered. "He will crawl to the door and cry like a baby. This is the ultimate fear. No one can survive the Nightmare Chamber." But something was wrong. Sam didn't jump out of his seat. He didn't cover his ears. He didn't even look at the black goo dripping near his shoes. Instead, Sam did something impossible. He leaned back in the uncomfortable metal chair. He crossed his legs and let out a long, slow sigh. He closed his eyes and a small, peaceful smile appeared on his face. "Is he dead?" one of the alien assistants asked, blinking their 3 eyes. "No," Cax growled, hitting the sensors. "His heart rate is slowing down. His brain waves are calm. No, that can't be right. He's relaxing." Inside the room, Sam felt the freezing wind hit his face. He heard the screaming noise and smelled the rot. But to Sam, this didn't feel like a torture chamber. It felt like something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He whispered to himself, "Finally, some peace and quiet." Cax was furious. He turned the dials higher, making the room shake and the shadows grow longer. He wanted to see terror. He wanted to see the human crumble. But the more the room turned into a living nightmare, the more comfortable Sam seemed to get. The aliens didn't understand. They had built a machine of pure horror, but the human was sitting there like he was at a spa. Cax realized that either his machine was broken, or humans were much, much weirder than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Commander Cax was no longer just confused, he was offended. His species, the Valerians, had spent centuries studying the psychology of fear. They knew exactly which frequencies caused panic and which visual patterns triggered madness. But this human, Sam, was sitting in the middle of a literal living nightmare, as if he were waiting for a bus. "He is mocking us," Cax hissed, his 4 eyes blinking in a rapid, angry sequence. "He thinks this is a game. He thinks he is stronger than Valerian science?" Cax stepped toward the console. His long, spindly fingers hovered over a dial that had never been turned past 60%. It was labeled Maximum Chaos. Using this setting was dangerous. It could physically shake the building, but Cax didn't care. He grabbed the dial and twisted it all the way to the right. Inside the chamber, the world exploded into madness. The dull green light vanished, replaced by strobe lights of blinding red and neon white. They flashed at a speed designed to cause total disorientation. The floor didn't just vibrate anymore. It began to tilt and heave like a ship in a violent storm. Huge, high-definition holograms of the galaxy's most terrifying predators materialized out of the dark. These weren't just monsters. They were xenomorph-style beasts with dripping fangs, dozens of glowing eyes, and claws the size of swords. They lunged at Sam, stopping just inches from his face, letting out bone-chilling roars that vibrated in his very chest. To add the final touch, Cax pumped in the smell of thick, heavy smoke and the scent of burning rubber. He added the sound of sirens, screaming crowds, and crashing metal. It was a sensory overload that should have melted a biological brain in seconds. "There," Cax said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and triumph. "No mind, human or otherwise, can process this much input. He will break now." The scientists gathered around the glass, holding their breath. They expected to see Sam curled in a ball, weeping and begging for the end. Instead, they saw Sam's head start to bob. At first, they thought it was a seizure. But then, they realized he was moving in time with the flashing lights. His right foot began to tap against the vibrating metal floor. Tap, 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 tap. He was finding a rhythm in the sirens and the strobe lights. One of the giant, many-eyed monsters lunged at him, its mouth opening wide to show rows of serrated teeth. It let out a roar that shook the glass of the observation deck. Sam didn't flinch. He actually leaned forward, squinting his eyes to see the monster better through the flashing red light. He reached out a hand, almost trying to pet the hologram's nose. "You know," Sam shouted over the noise, his voice sounding oddly calm, "you actually look a lot like my old neighbor's dog, Buster." Well, maybe a bit cuter. Buster had really bad breath and would never stop barking at the mailman. "At least you're quiet between the screams." He looked around at the smoke and the tilting floor. He let out a small, appreciative whistle. "The lighting is a bit much," Sam muttered to himself. "But honestly, it reminds me of that one club in downtown Chicago. The Electric Basement, man, that place was a mess. The floor was always sticky, the music was way louder than this, and you'd usually leave with a headache and a lost shoe. This is actually kind of nostalgic." On the other side of the glass, a scientist dropped his tablet. "Nostalgic," he whispered. He called the void of eternal screams. "Nostalgic." Commander Cax felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He looked at the readings. Sam's blood pressure was slightly elevated, but not from fear. It was from excitement. He wasn't terrified, he was being entertained. "He's not breaking," Cax whispered, his voice full of a new kind of terror. "He's enjoying it." What kind of hell? World did this creature come from where this is a pleasant memory? Sam wiped a bit of the black goo off his sleeve and looked directly at the glass wall where he knew the aliens were watching. He gave a thumbs up and yelled, "Hey, can you make the floor shake a little more? It's really helping with the knot in my lower back." Cax slumped into his chair. He had built a nightmare for the universe, but he had accidentally built a playground for a human. The screaming sirens cut out. The strobe lights flickered once, twice, and then died, leaving the room in a dull, gray hum. The holograms of the many-eyed beasts dissolved into digital dust. The heavy, pressurized door hissed open, and Commander Cax marched into the chamber. His scales were vibrating, not with fear, but with a pure, shaking frustration that made his skin turn a bruised shade of purple. Behind him, his assistants stayed in the doorway, clutching their clipboards as if they were shields. They looked at Sam as if he were a ghost, or perhaps a god. "Human," Cax shouted, his voice cracking. "Explain this. This is a chamber of pure psychological torture. We have spent billions of credits researching the fear frequency. We are using your deepest biological terrors, isolation, darkness, chaos, and predators against you. Why are you not broken? Why are you sitting there like you just finished a pleasant meal?" Sam looked up. He didn't look traumatized. He didn't even look tired. He looked like a man who had just enjoyed a very interesting movie. He wiped a stray drop of the black nightmare goo from his forehead and gave Cax a relaxed grin. "You call this a nightmare?" Sam asked, his voice echoing in the now quiet room. "Honestly, Commander, I think you guys have had it too easy out here in space. To me, this feels like home. It's actually kind of cozy." Cax froze. "Cozy? There were monsters. The floor was literal liquid shadow. The air was freezing." "Yeah, about that," Sam said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Let me tell you a little bit about where I come from. I grew up in a place called New York City. Specifically, I lived in a tiny, one-room apartment in a building that was about 100 years old. My window faced an alleyway that looked exactly like the dark corners of this room." Sam stood up and started pacing the small chamber, pointing at the walls. "You see these dripping walls? My ceiling leaked every time it rained. But it wasn't cool, high-tech alien oil. It was just rusty radiator water, and that screaming noise you played. Commander, I lived directly above a subway line. Every 10 minutes, 24 hours a day. The entire building would shake so hard the pictures fell off the walls. Sketch. Rumbo. Boom. It sounded exactly like your fear frequency. To me, that sound doesn't mean death is coming. It just means the fort train is running late again." The alien scientists started whispering frantically to each other. Cax's jaw dropped. But the monsters, the holograms of the apex predators. Oh, the big toothy guys. Sam laughed. "Look, if you've ever tried to catch a bus at 2000 a.m. in the rain while 3 guys are arguing over a slice of pizza and a stray cat is hissing at you from a trash can, those holograms don't really move the needle. On Earth, we have things called job interviews and student loans. We have customer service lines where you have to listen to bad music for 3 hours just to talk to a human. That is psychological torture." Sam walked closer to Cax, who instinctively took a step back. "The truth is, Commander, humans evolved on a planet that was trying to kill us every single day. We have storms that can level cities, viruses we can't see, and we have to pay rent every month just to keep existing. We've turned stress into a hobby. We watch horror movies for fun. We go to theme parks just to feel like we're falling to our deaths. Sam reached out and patted Cax on his scaly shoulder. The commander flinched. You built a room that mimics chaos, Sam explained gently. But for a human, chaos is just our Tuesday. You gave me a dark room, a vibrating chair, and some loud noises. In my world, we call that a relaxing commute. Honestly, the only thing missing was a guy playing a drum set made of plastic buckets, and someone trying to sell me a broken umbrella. Cax looked around his masterpiece. The nightmare chamber suddenly looked small. It looked pathetic. It looked like a child's toy. He realized that the monsters he had created were nothing compared to the daily life of a standard human being. You mean to tell me, Cax whispered, his voice trembling, that your entire species lives in a state of constant, simulated agony just to survive? Pretty much. Sam shrugged. But we have coffee and dogs, so it balances out. Anyway, are we done? Because if I'm being honest, the silence in here is starting to get a little creepy. It's too quiet. It's making me nervous. Cax stared at Sam, a new kind of horror dawning on him. He didn't fear the human because of his strength. He feared him because of his sanity. Commander Cax felt a cold sensation in his primary heart, and his backup heart too. He watched as Sam casually strolled over to the wall, dipped a finger into the thick, black, terror fluid, and rubbed it between his thumb and forefinger. The liquid was designed to trigger a biological flight response, a chemical soup of pure dread. Sam just sniffed it. Smells a bit like burnt plastic and old coffee, he remarked. You guys should try a different base. Maybe something with a hint of vinegar. That really gets under the skin. Cax staggered back, leaning against the cold glass of the observation deck. You are touching the essence of agony, he stuttered through his translator. That liquid is designed to make your skin crawl. It represents the darkness of the deep void. Sam laughed, a bright, genuine sound that felt like a physical blow to the alien scientists. Commander, I've had worse things spilled on me during a 2-hour flight in economy class. Once, a toddler dropped a grape soda on my lap while the guy in front of me reclined his seat into my knees. That was a nightmare. This is just messy. He turned his attention to the temperature. The room was currently sitting at a bone-chilling -20 degrees. Most species in the known galaxy would have gone into hibernation or suffered total organ failure by now. And the cold, Sam continued, shaking his head. You call this freezing? I once spent a winter in Chicago when the heater in my apartment broke. The wind was coming off Lake Michigan like a frozen blade. I had to wear 3 pairs of socks and sleep under a rug just to keep my toes. This room feels like a light autumn breeze. It's actually quite refreshing after being cooped up in your climate-controlled spaceship. It's crisp. Cax turned to his lead technician. Is the sensor broken? Check the thermal output. It is working perfectly, Commander. The technician whispered, his scales turning a pale, sickly white. The human's internal temperature is stable. He isn't even shivering. His biology, it just accepts the trauma. Sam walked over to where one of the terrifying holograms had stood just moments ago. He mimicked the monster's roar, but it sounded more like a bored yawn. And those monsters, the big ones with the teeth and the glowing eyes. I've seen scarier things in a middle school cafeteria. Have you ever seen a group of 12-year-olds when the pizza runs out, or a gym teacher with a whistle and a bad attitude? Now that is true terror. Your monsters were too symmetrical, too clean. Real horror is messy. Real horror is a bill you can't pay or a check engine light that turns on when you're 300 miles from home. The realization hit the aliens like a physical weight. They had spent their entire lives living in a peaceful, organized, and technologically perfect society. To them, discomfort was a tragedy. To them, a loud noise was a crisis. They had built a chamber based on their idea of what fear should be. But they had forgotten one thing: Earth. They pulled up the data on Earth's history on their floating screens. They saw images of hurricanes, sprawling, crowded cities, rush-hour traffic, and people jumping out of airplanes for sport. They saw videos of humans eating spicy peppers that would melt an alien's tongue, all while crying and laughing at the same time. Commander, the technician said, his voice trembling. Earth is not a planet. It is a natural nightmare chamber. Evolution didn't just create the humans, it forged them in a furnace of constant, low-level stress. They don't just survive chaos, they require it. Without it, they get bored. Cax looked at Sam. The human was now using the torture chair to do some light stretching. To Sam, Cax whispered, this high-tech torture room isn't a prison. It's a quiet vacation. We offered him darkness and he found peace. We offered him cold and he found comfort. We offered him monsters and he found friends. Sam looked up at the glass and waved. Hey, Cax! Since we're comparing notes, do you have any nightmares involving taxes or a slow internet connection? Because if you could simulate a spinning loading icon that never finishes, I might actually start to sweat. Cax didn't answer. He simply signaled for his team to prepare the final stage. He had one more trick left, but for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if he wanted to win. The hum of the machines died down. The heavy, pressurized doors of the nightmare chamber creaked open for the final time. Commander Cax stood there, his 4 eyes blinking in a confused, tired pattern. He looked at Sam, who was currently using his T-shirt to wipe some of the black, fierce slime off the metal chair so he could sit more comfortably. It's actually quite nice in here, Sam said, looking up as the lights returned to a normal, soft yellow. The screaming noise. Honestly, it reminds me of the heavy metal radio station I used to listen to while doing my taxes. The flashing lights feel like a disco I went to in Berlin back in 2009. And the temperature. Can you actually turn the heat down a little more? It's perfect for a nap. I haven't slept this well since I moved to the space station. Cax didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply reached over to the main control board and pulled the master lever. The screens went dark. The sensors went silent. The void of eternal screams was now just an empty, quiet room. The commander realized a terrifying truth. You cannot break a species that was born and raised in chaos. You cannot threaten someone with a nightmare when they have already lived through a Monday morning in a big city. As the alien guards led Sam out of the chamber, Cax walked beside him. The commander looked smaller now, his pride replaced by a deep, scientific curiosity. Human, Cax asked, his voice low and raspy. I have studied 1,000 worlds. I have seen empires fall because of the sounds we played in that room. Yet, you looked at our greatest terrors and you smiled. What do you call this feeling? How does your mind process such horror as comfort? Sam stretched his arms high above his head, his joints popping with a loud crack that made the aliens jump. He let out a long, satisfied yawn. I call it nostalgic, Sam said with a shrug. It reminds me of the good old days. Back on Earth, everything is loud, everything is a little bit broken, and something is always trying to take your money or your time. Your room didn't feel like a torture chamber. It felt like a memory of home. It was the first time in months I didn't have to worry about emails or social media. It was just me, some monsters, and some loud music. It was peaceful. Cax stopped walking. Peaceful, he whispered to himself. He found peace in our apocalypse. The aliens didn't just turn off the nightmare chamber that day, they deleted the software and melted the hardware. They realized that if a human called their worst torture nostalgic, then the gap between their two species was a canyon they might never cross. But as they reached the cafeteria of the ship, Cax had one more question. Sam, if our nightmare chamber was a vacation for you, then what do humans do for fun? What does a happy chamber look like on Earth? Sam paused, a mischievous glint in his eye. Oh, you know, we jump out of planes with nothing but a silk backpack. We climb mountains so high the air disappears. We go to haunted houses, where people pay $50 to have teenagers in masks chase them with chainsaws. And sometimes, we just sit in a dark room and watch movies about the end of the world while eating salty corn. The alien scientists stopped walking. One of them actually fainted, his clipboard clattering to the floor. You pay to be scared? Cax asked, his voice trembling. Every weekend, Sam laughed, patting the commander on the back. Life is boring if you aren't a little bit terrified, Cax. You should come over for a movie night. I've got a copy of The Thing that will make your scales fall off. Cax took a long look at the human. He saw a creature that didn't just survive the dark. He invited the dark over for a drink. From that day on, the Valerians changed their entire military strategy. They stopped building weapons of fear. Instead, they made a new rule that was taught to every young alien soldier. Never, under any circumstances, try to scare a human. They will probably just enjoy the show and ask for popcorn. Sam walked off toward his quarters, whistling a tune that sounded suspiciously like the fear frequency. From the chamber, he had never felt more refreshed.